It begins in the early hours of a London morning, when the city's fog clings stubbornly to the streets, as if trying to obscure the storm about to hit the royal family. News had already begun to leak into the media, whispers carried by well-placed insiders and palace aides who had grown weary of secrecy. The topic of conversation was as explosive as it was personal. Prince Harry had requested a private reconciliation meeting with his father, King Charles III, and the response had been nothing short of shocking. Sources close to the royal family reported that Charles had declined the meeting outright, a move that sent ripples through the corridors of Buckingham Palace and into the lives of millions of people who follow the monarchy's every move. The refusal was not just a denial of a conversation. It carried weight, consequence, and a level of finality that few could have anticipated. In the midst of this growing tension, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, reportedly reacted with outrage, her emotions ranging from disbelief to fury as she confronted the reality that her husband's attempt to mend the family rift might be entirely blocked, not just by circumstance, but by deliberate choice. For months, Harry had been navigating a complex web of public perception, personal loyalty, and the ever-present shadow of past conflicts that had already strained his relationship with the royal family. His move toward reconciliation was not impulsive. It was calculated, motivated by a desire to find common ground, restore familial ties, and perhaps, quietly, to ensure that his own legacy and that of his children would remain connected to the history and responsibilities of the monarchy. Yet, the news of Charles's refusal arrived like a thunderclap, shaking not only Harry but also the carefully constructed narrative of the Sussexes' public life. For Meghan, this was more than a setback. It was a personal affront, a signal that the influence and standing they had hoped to maintain within the royal framework might be systematically dismantled, with consequences that extended beyond mere titles or ceremonial privileges. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The tension surrounding this refusal was heightened by the alleged stipulations that accompanied Charles's decision. Rumors circulated within royal circles and leaked into the media that the king's response was not limited to declining a meeting. Sources hinted that as part of this refusal, Charles intended to strip Prince Harry of all inheritance and sever his financial and titular connections with Meghan Markle, effectively forcing a complete separation not just in duty but in legacy. If accurate, such a move would be unprecedented in modern royal history, echoing historical instances where family disputes had led to estrangement and the cutting off of financial support, but occurring on a scale amplified by global media attention and public scrutiny. The implications for Harry and Meghan were profound. Without inheritance or institutional backing, their ability to maintain the lifestyle, influence, and charitable initiatives traditionally supported by royal patronage could be severely compromised, reshaping their lives in ways previously unimagined. Amidst the unfolding crisis, the public's attention turned toward Meghan Markle, whose role in this narrative had often been the subject of intense scrutiny. While Harry's actions were interpreted through the lens of duty and familial responsibility, Meghan's response was read as a barometer for broader tensions between the couple and the palace. Reports suggested that Meghan's outrage was not merely performative. It was fueled by genuine concern for her family's stability, her public reputation, and the practical ramifications of losing royal support. Friends close to the Duchess described her as navigating a storm of emotions, oscillating between the protective instincts she felt toward her husband and children and the strategic calculations required to preserve their independence and maintain public favor. Her reaction, intense and visible in private circles, would soon intersect with media speculation, creating a feedback loop that magnified every nuance of the family's crisis. The refusal itself was emblematic of a larger, unresolved tension within the monarchy, the delicate balance between tradition and modernization, private emotion and public duty, loyalty to family and the demands of an institution under constant global scrutiny. King Charles, in declining Harry's request, reportedly weighed not only the personal history of grievances, perceived slights, and public controversies, but also the broader consequences of a reconciliation that could appear conditional, incomplete, or politically inconvenient. For Charles, every decision is magnified, scrutinized, and recorded, a constant reminder that the monarchy operates not merely as a family, but as a symbol of continuity, national identity, and historical legacy. By taking a firm stance, the king may have been asserting the authority of his position, sending a message about the expectations of loyalty, discretion, and conformity within the royal fold. In the early days following the refusal, the palace became a hive of speculation, with aides, courtiers, and media insiders attempting to interpret what this meant for the future of Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal family. Analysts pointed to the symbolic nature of the refusal. It was not simply about a meeting. It represented a potential fracture, a public acknowledgement that reconciliation was no longer a matter of negotiation but a matter of imposed consequence. Social media, ever vigilant, exploded with commentary, memes, and debates. Each post dissecting the possible reasons for the king's actions, the anticipated responses from Harry and Meghan, and the long-term implications for the institution of the monarchy. Every narrative angle was explored, from political motivations to personal grudges, from the historical context of royal inheritance disputes to the immediate, visceral reactions of individuals caught in the glare of public attention. As the story developed, the question at the forefront for both royal watchers and the general public was simple yet profound. Why would King Charles refuse a meeting with his own son, particularly when reconciliation seemed in the interest of family unity and public perception? Insider accounts suggested that Charles's decision was informed by multiple factors: the cumulative history of perceived betrayals, the influence of trusted advisors, and the need to assert authority in a modern context where the monarchy's relevance and cohesion are continuously evaluated. Harry's prior interviews, public statements, and the couple's media engagements had already strained the king's patience, creating an environment where a private meeting might be viewed not as an olive branch, but as a potentially compromising negotiation. The refusal, therefore, may have been as much about principle and precedent as it was about personal sentiment, a strategic decision to uphold a standard of accountability within the royal family that could serve as an example for future generations. For Meghan Markle, the stakes were immediately personal. As reports of the king's alleged conditions surfaced, her concerns extended beyond immediate outrage to strategic calculations about survival, influence, and autonomy. The prospect of Harry losing inheritance and having all ties severed with Meghan implied a forced separation not just of familial connection, but also of collaborative initiatives, charitable work, and public engagement strategies that the couple had cultivated since stepping back from full royal duties. Friends suggested that Meghan viewed this as an existential challenge, a moment that demanded both emotional resilience and tactical acumen. Every decision now carried weight. Every response had the potential to affect public perception, and every private conversation could be scrutinized or leaked, further complicating an already tense situation. At the center of this unfolding drama was Prince Harry himself, navigating an emotional and practical minefield. Torn between loyalty to his wife, responsibility toward his children, and a desire to maintain connection with his father, Harry faced a dilemma of unprecedented complexity. Advisors and confidants described his internal struggle as a mixture of hope, frustration, and pragmatic calculation, balancing the emotional need for familial reconciliation against the potential consequences of the king's refusal. The magnitude of this decision was amplified by public scrutiny. Harry's every move was being watched, analyzed, and interpreted, leaving little room for error or miscommunication. In this high-stakes environment, every word, gesture, and decision carried disproportionate consequence. The media, of course, was quick to capitalize on every leak, rumor, and insider account. News outlets across the world framed the refusal as both a personal drama and a symbol of larger tensions within the monarchy. Headlines suggested betrayal, scandal, and irreparable rifts, feeding into public fascination with royal dynamics. Commentators dissected body language, reviewed historical precedents, and speculated endlessly about potential resolutions. For Meghan and Harry, the interplay between private anguish and public interpretation became a complex balancing act, requiring strategic silence at times and careful engagement at others to manage the narrative while safeguarding their personal and familial interests. Yet, amidst the chaos, one aspect remained clear. This was not merely a story of disinheritance or royal protocol. It was a deeply human story of family conflict, love, loyalty, and the intersection of personal ambition with institutional responsibility. The refusal by King Charles to meet with Harry illuminated the vulnerabilities and pressures inherent in public life, particularly when personal relationships are inseparable from national symbolism and historical expectation. Meghan Markle's outrage, therefore, was not simply a reaction to protocol or procedure. It was an expression of the very real emotional stakes involved in navigating a life where family, duty, and public image are inextricably intertwined. As this narrative continues to unfold, questions linger. What does this mean for the future of Harry and Meghan's relationship with the monarchy? How will the couple adapt to the potential loss of inheritance, titles, and formal support? And perhaps most importantly, what does this episode reveal about the enduring tensions between personal loyalty and institutional obligation, between private emotion and public expectation? The answers remain elusive, hidden behind palace walls and strategic communications, leaving the public and the royal family alike to grapple with the consequences of a refusal that may reshape not just individual lives, but the perception and structure of the monarchy itself. And King Charles, to the reactions of the palace staff, royal advisors, and the global public, as well as the cascading consequences that such a refusal may have on the monarchy, the media narrative, and the personal lives of everyone involved. The layers of this story are complex and intertwined, blending personal grief, strategic calculation, public image management, and historical precedent in ways that make it difficult to separate fact from perception, emotion from strategy. At the heart of this crisis is Prince Harry, a man caught between the love for his family and the obligations imposed upon him by an institution that demands loyalty, discretion, and deference. His desire to reconcile with his father was not a fleeting whim. It was the result of months, if not years, of reflection, emotional labor, and the navigation of past controversies that have often defined his public life. From the moment he stepped back from his senior royal duties, Harry's life has been a careful negotiation between independence and expectation, autonomy and duty, personal happiness and institutional loyalty. Every interview, public appearance, and philanthropic initiative has been measured not just for its impact on the couple's reputation, but also for how it reflects on the monarchy as a whole. In this context, the refusal by King Charles carries significance far beyond a single meeting. It is an act that symbolizes disapproval, censure, and perhaps even a reassertion of authority in a situation where the balance of power has shifted dramatically. For Meghan Markle, the situation is equally layered and complex. Her journey within the royal family has been marked by intense public scrutiny, relentless media coverage, and the constant need to navigate the intersection of personal identity and public expectation. Since marrying Prince Harry, Meghan has been cast into a role that demands perfection, patience, and perpetual diplomacy, all while under the microscope of an audience eager to dissect every word, gesture, and expression. The news of the king's refusal to meet with Harry, coupled with the rumored conditions attached, represents not just a logistical challenge but a deeply personal affront. Friends and confidants report that Meghan felt a profound sense of betrayal and anger, perceiving the refusal as a signal that her family's standing within the royal institution could be systematically undermined, leaving her and Harry vulnerable to both public criticism and institutional marginalization. Beyond the personal ramifications, the decision by King Charles has created a ripple effect throughout the broader monarchy. Courtiers and advisors are reportedly scrambling to assess the political and public fallout, weighing the optics of a fractured family against the need to maintain institutional authority. Some insiders suggest that the refusal is a calculated effort to signal that no member of the royal family, regardless of lineage or personal grievances, is exempt from accountability or expectation. Others caution that the move risks alienating not only Harry and Meghan but also segments of the public who view the Sussexes sympathetically, particularly those who value transparency, modernity, and empathy within the monarchy. This balancing act between upholding tradition and managing contemporary perceptions is a delicate one, with each decision carrying both immediate and long-term consequences that may affect public trust, media narratives, and the internal cohesion of the royal family for years to come. In this environment, every stakeholder is forced to navigate a landscape where personal emotions collide with institutional imperatives. Harry, Meghan, and even King Charles must consider not only their private feelings, but also the public interpretations of their actions, the historical precedents being set, and the potential implications for future generations of the royal family. The intersection of these pressures creates a highly charged atmosphere, one in which every statement, movement, or omission can be amplified, scrutinized, and potentially weaponized in the court of public opinion. Analysts note that the stakes are particularly high because this crisis touches on both the personal integrity of family relationships and the perceived legitimacy of a centuries-old institution struggling to maintain relevance in a modern world increasingly focused on transparency and accountability. For the media, this story represents a convergence of all the elements that drive public fascination: scandal, familial conflict, high stakes, and human drama. News outlets, social media commentators, and online forums have dissected every leaked detail, from body language and carefully worded statements to historical comparisons and speculation about inheritance and titles. Every narrative angle has been pursued, feeding a voracious audience hungry for insight, confirmation, and controversy. The intense media attention not only amplifies the pressure on Harry and Meghan, but also shapes the public's perception of the king's decision, creating a feedback loop in which action, perception, and reaction become inseparably linked. In many ways, the global coverage transforms a private family matter into a public spectacle, with consequences that extend far beyond the individuals directly involved. Amidst this swirl of speculation and media scrutiny, the royal household itself has become a stage for behind-the-scenes maneuvers. Aides and courtiers, long accustomed to managing both public appearances and internal communications, now find themselves mediating between competing interests, controlling leaks, and attempting to maintain an image of stability despite the apparent fracture. Confidential meetings, strategy sessions, and private conversations are reportedly taking place with unprecedented urgency, as the palace seeks to anticipate reactions from both the public and the press. This intricate dance reflects the dual realities of modern monarchy: the need to uphold historical precedent and dignity while responding to the relentless, instantaneous scrutiny of a global audience armed with social media and digital access. In the private sphere, Harry and Meghan's responses have been characterized by a mix of careful strategy and raw emotion. Advisors indicate that Meghan, in particular, has taken an assertive role, balancing outrage with tactical planning, ensuring that every move aligns with both public messaging and personal protection. Her approach is reportedly informed by years of navigating high-stakes environments, understanding the media, and anticipating the reactions of both the palace and the public. Meanwhile, Harry is portrayed as wrestling with the personal implications of rejection and the practical consequences of losing financial and institutional support, seeking to maintain his integrity and agency in a situation largely dictated by others' decisions. The broader public reaction has been just as dynamic, reflecting the polarization often seen in discussions of the monarchy. Some express sympathy for Harry and Meghan, emphasizing empathy, fairness, and the human cost of royal life. Others focus on duty, tradition, and the expectations imposed upon those born into the royal family, framing the king's refusal as a necessary measure to uphold institutional stability. Commentators analyze historical precedents, comparing this incident to previous instances of familial conflict within the monarchy, while social media discourse amplifies every nuance, creating an almost real-time narrative that intertwines fact, speculation, and opinion. As the situation continues to unfold, the central themes become increasingly clear: the tension between personal loyalty and institutional obligation, the intersection of private emotion and public duty, and the far-reaching consequences of decisions made at the highest levels of royal authority. For Harry and Meghan, the king's refusal is not simply a denial of a meeting. It is a pivotal moment with implications for their financial security, social standing, and the well-being of their children. For King Charles, the decision reflects a strategic calculation aimed at asserting authority, maintaining tradition, in preserving the integrity of the monarchy. And for the global public, it is a lens through which to examine the human costs, ethical considerations, and dramatic narratives that continue to shape the institution of the British royal family. The groundwork has been laid, the key players introduced, the stakes defined, and the central conflict illuminated. With this foundation, the story is ready to move into the next section, where we will examine the immediate reactions within the palace, the role of advisors and courtiers, and the first signs of the public and media storm that would follow, providing a detailed, immersive look at the unfolding drama that continues to captivate and shock audiences worldwide. The immediate reaction within the palace to King Charles's refusal to meet with Prince Harry was one of controlled urgency, a flurry of activity beneath the polished veneer of tradition and decorum. Courtiers and senior aides, long accustomed to mediating the delicate balance between personal sentiment and institutional necessity, found themselves navigating a complex web of emotions, expectations, and public perception. The initial announcement, or, more accurately, the leak of the refusal, did not come in the form of a formal statement. Instead, it circulated through discreet channels, whispered among senior staff, and subtly reinforced through carefully crafted language in the official communications team. This approach was intended to preserve a sense of stability while allowing the monarchy to gauge the response both internally and externally before committing to a more public stance. The palace's internal response was orchestrated with military precision. Advisors convened in the familiar oak-paneled rooms of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, mapping out potential outcomes, analyzing historical precedents, and preparing contingency plans for public relations management. Some aides emphasized the need to frame the refusal as a principled decision, a measure taken to protect the integrity of the institution and to ensure that family conflicts did not spill into the public domain unchecked. Others warned that any appearance of coldness or personal vindictiveness could exacerbate an already volatile situation, risking public sympathy swinging decisively in favor of Harry and Meghan, which could, in turn, undermine the king's carefully cultivated image of fairness and approachability. Among the courtiers, there was palpable tension. Many had served the royal family for decades, witnessing firsthand the ebbs and flows of public opinion and the intricate ballet of media manipulation, strategic messaging, and interpersonal diplomacy required to maintain the monarchy's relevance. Some expressed concern that this particular incident, unlike previous disagreements or private disputes, carried an extraordinary risk. It was not simply a matter of ceremonial protocol or misaligned schedules, but an emotionally charged conflict that involved direct family ties, personal grievances, and allegations that could not easily be contained. The stakes were amplified by the presence of social media, 24-hour news cycles, and a global audience capable of magnifying even minor developments into major crises. Within the inner circle, there were debates over how to manage communications. Should the palace release a formal statement clarifying the reasons behind the refusal? Or should they rely on silence, allowing the story to unfold gradually while maintaining an aura of restraint and dignity? Strategists pointed out that both approaches carried inherent risks. An official statement could be dissected endlessly for subtext, nuance, or perceived insensitivity, while silence could be interpreted as evasion, secrecy, or even malice. The tension between transparency and discretion, so often a defining feature of royal operations, was now front and center, with no easy solutions. The emotional undertones within the palace were equally complex. Staff who had grown close to both Harry and Meghan reportedly felt torn between loyalty to the crown and empathy for the couple's predicament. Some aides privately acknowledged the difficulty of navigating a scenario where the personal and professional were inseparable, where decisions about appearances, meetings, and schedules carried profound emotional consequences for individuals as well as institutional implications. The mood was one of anxious deliberation, a quiet recognition that every word, every gesture, and every decision in the coming days would be scrutinized not only by the media, but also by the public, historians, and importantly, future generations of the royal family. Meanwhile, Prince Harry and Meghan were not passive observers in this unfolding drama. Sources close to the couple described a sense of shock and frustration upon learning of the king's refusal. For Harry, the act represented not only a personal setback in his attempts to reconcile, but also a public rebuke that challenged his autonomy and decision-making. For Meghan, the implications were layered with both personal and strategic concerns. The refusal could affect their public image, their philanthropic initiatives, and the broader narrative surrounding their role in the monarchy. Conversations with advisors, friends, and legal counsel reportedly intensified, as the couple sought to determine how best to respond without escalating tensions further or compromising their standing. The media quickly seized upon the unfolding situation. Leading news outlets and royal commentators framed the refusal as a dramatic rupture, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of the king denying an audience to his own son. Headlines proliferated, ranging from sympathetic portrayals of Harry as a wronged son to narratives highlighting Charles's duty-bound stance, framing the refusal as an exercise in principled leadership. Social media amplified these interpretations exponentially, with audiences dissecting every statement, every historical comparison, and every leaked detail, generating a swirling maelstrom of speculation, debate, and emotional reaction that the palace could neither fully control nor ignore. This media frenzy had direct repercussions on the palace staff's daily operations. Press officers worked tirelessly to craft messaging that balanced firmness with tact, clarity with discretion, and transparency with confidentiality. Senior aides coordinated with communications teams across international branches, ensuring that statements released in London aligned with those in Commonwealth countries and other global media hubs. The underlying strategy was to maintain narrative control, prevent misinformation, and manage both internal and external perceptions of the monarchy's stability and integrity. Every press briefing, every background conversation, and every carefully worded public message became a chess move in a high-stakes game where missteps could be magnified exponentially. Beyond the palace walls, public opinion was already beginning to form and shift in real time. Opinion polls suggested a growing polarization. Some viewed the king's refusal as an understandable enforcement of protocol and family discipline, while others sympathized with Harry and Meghan, interpreting the refusal as emotionally cold and institutionally rigid. Social media platforms became arenas for debate, with hashtags, viral posts, and trending discussions framing the story through myriad lenses, from family drama to institutional critique to broader societal questions about fairness, authority, and generational change. Every new leak, every subtle movement captured by paparazzi or public observers, and every commentary from pundits or influencers contributed to a narrative that was increasingly difficult for any party to manage or contain. The interplay between palace strategy, personal emotion, and public perception underscored the unique pressures of royal life. Unlike private families, whose disputes can remain internal, the royal family's decisions are constantly filtered through media, tradition, and global scrutiny. The refusal to meet was more than a private act of disagreement. It was a signal, a statement, and a catalyst for broader discussion about loyalty, authority, and the evolving role of monarchy in the modern world. Within this environment, every move carried implications far beyond the immediate actors, shaping not only reputations and relationships, but also the historical record and collective memory of one of the world's most famous families. Advisors and courtiers reportedly began preparing for potential public appearances and interviews, anticipating questions about the king's decision and the couple's reactions. Strategy sessions included media training for spokespeople, rapid response planning for potential leaks, and simulations of various scenarios ranging from minor misinterpretations to major public relations crises. The underlying goal was to present a consistent, measured narrative while protecting the dignity of the monarchy, preventing escalation, and mitigating the risk of lasting damage to both the institution and individual members' reputations. Amidst all this preparation, the human element remained critical. Observers note that even in an institution defined by protocol and tradition, emotion, loyalty, and personal relationships continue to influence decisions. The refusal was not merely a procedural act. It was imbued with the weight of history, familial dynamics, and individual personalities. For Harry and Meghan, it represented a challenge to both personal dignity and strategic positioning. For King Charles, it was a balancing act between paternal concern institutional responsibility, and public accountability. And for the palace staff, it was a test of their ability to navigate complexity, manage optics, and maintain operational cohesion under extraordinary pressure. The initial 48 hours following the refusal were characterized by a flurry of activity. Private calls between advisors, confidential meetings with legal teams, and behind-the-scenes negotiations sought to anticipate consequences, manage immediate fallout, and prepare for the inevitable scrutiny of public opinion. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's close confidants were reportedly strategizing ways to maintain their narrative, safeguard their interests, and respond effectively without further inflaming tensions. This period underscored the delicate interplay of personal agency, institutional constraint, and public perception that defines the modern royal experience. In conclusion, the immediate palace reaction to King Charles's refusal was a microcosm of the broader crisis facing the monarchy, a complex negotiation between personal emotion, institutional responsibility, and global perception. Advisors and courtiers worked tirelessly to manage communications, anticipate consequences, and maintain stability, while Harry and Meghan navigated the emotional and strategic implications of rejection and public scrutiny. The media amplified every development, creating a dynamic feedback loop that heightened pressure on all parties involved. This confluence of factors set the stage for the subsequent unfolding of events, highlighting the intricate balance between family, duty, and the relentless gaze of a world invested in the drama of the British royal family. Following the immediate reactions within the palace, the situation rapidly escalated into a highly charged environment where every conversation, glance, and decision carried amplified significance. Prince Harry, isolated by the king's refusal, began to feel the weight of not only personal rejection, but also the intense scrutiny of the global media and public opinion. While in the past, private grievances could remain largely confined within family walls, the current circumstances made secrecy nearly impossible. The refusal was more than a denial of a meeting. It was a symbolic statement with ripples that extended far beyond a simple familial disagreement. Each interaction, whether with advisors, family members, or the press, was now filtered through layers of strategic calculation, personal emotion, and public interpretation. Harry's immediate circle described a profound sense of frustration and helplessness. The king's refusal, according to sources close to the couple, was perceived as a calculated move to assert authority and maintain control over the narrative surrounding the family. The implications were deeply personal. Harry felt a complex mix of betrayal, disappointment, and an overwhelming need to defend his position in the public eye. Meghan, meanwhile, was reportedly attempting to manage both her own emotional response and the broader public messaging on their behalf. She understood that any visible sign of weakness or reaction could be exploited by media outlets, further inflaming an already volatile situation. In the weeks that followed, Harry and Meghan's team engaged in intensive strategic sessions, carefully planning how to navigate the increasingly hostile media landscape. Advisors suggested various approaches, ranging from controlled public statements to discreet private communications with select journalists. Every potential move was analyzed in terms of its short-term impact and long-term implications. The couple's interactions with the press became tightly choreographed, with careful attention paid to tone, timing, and content. Sources indicated that Harry, in particular, was determined to assert his independence and maintain a sense of personal agency, despite the king's public stance and the growing intensity of scrutiny from both traditional media and social platforms. The refusal also had a pronounced impact on palace staff and senior advisors. Courtiers were required to anticipate every possible fallout from this decision, coordinating responses across multiple departments and jurisdictions. Meetings between senior staff members became frequent and urgent, focusing not only on damage control, but also on the preservation of the monarchy's public image. The delicate balance between protecting the family's reputation and managing internal tensions became a primary concern. Reports suggest that internal memos circulated emphasizing the importance of maintaining a united front, despite growing speculation about cracks within the family. Staff members were under immense pressure to navigate an increasingly complex web of interpersonal relationships, institutional duties, and media scrutiny, all while upholding the appearance of order and stability. Simultaneously, public perception of the king's refusal began to shift as various media outlets interpreted the decision through different lenses. Conservative commentators emphasized the necessity of discipline and protocol, framing the king's actions as an exercise of principled leadership. Meanwhile, more sympathetic outlets highlighted the personal cost to Harry, portraying him as a figure caught between duty and familial rejection. Social media amplified these narratives, generating viral debates, trending hashtags, and widespread speculation about the internal dynamics of the royal family. The palace's communications team faced the challenging task of addressing inquiries without appearing reactive or defensive, carefully managing the flow of information to maintain control over the story. Experts in psychology and public relations have suggested that Meghan's reaction is consistent with a natural response to rejection, amplified by high stakes and constant visibility. The simultaneous pressures of familial estrangement, financial implications, and public scrutiny can create a profound sense of vulnerability and urgency. Sources indicate that Meghan leaned heavily on trusted confidants, finding solace and guidance from individuals who had observed her navigating complex and high-pressure situations in the past. Their advice reportedly helped her channel her emotional energy into strategic planning rather than reactive confrontation. Meghan's outrage also sparked discussions within the palace, with senior aides and advisors considering how the public narrative would unfold. While some argued for quiet diplomacy and patience, others anticipated that leaks, commentary, and speculation were inevitable. Strategies were debated on how to minimize the impact on ongoing royal initiatives, upcoming engagements, and the broader perception of stability within the monarchy. Meghan's response, therefore, became not only a private emotional matter but also a focal point for broader institutional considerations, further intensifying the pressure and complexity of the situation. Amidst this turmoil, Meghan reportedly found herself reflecting on the broader significance of the king's decision. She questioned what it meant for Harry's future role within the family, their children's place in royal life, and the potential for lasting damage to family relationships. The emotional weight of these reflections, coupled with immediate feelings of anger and disappointment, created a tension that she had to navigate carefully. Sources suggest that Meghan sought to channel these intense emotions into planning, preparation, and private conversations aimed at maintaining unity within her own family while respecting the larger institutional boundaries imposed by the king. Ultimately, this chapter reveals a deeply human side of Meghan Markle, one often hidden behind public appearances and media narratives. Her outrage, pain, and strategic responses highlight the complex intersection of personal emotion, familial loyalty, and public accountability. In the days following King Charles's refusal, Meghan was reportedly navigating a storm of emotional intensity, careful calculation, and media management, all while seeking to maintain her sense of agency and protect the well-being of her family. For Prince Harry, the moment he received the news that his father would not meet him to discuss reconciliation was a visceral blow. Sources close to the Duke of Sussex have described a scene of quiet devastation. Harry, normally composed in public appearances, was said to have retreated to a private wing of his residence, pacing and staring out windows, wrestling with the storm of emotions that the refusal unleashed. To Harry, this was not just a matter of protocol or familial disagreement. It struck at the very core of his identity as a son, a husband, and a father, forcing him to confront the limitations of influence, forgiveness, and legacy within the royal framework. The refusal was particularly poignant because Harry had, by all accounts, approached the situation with sincerity and humility. Insiders suggest that he had spent weeks drafting letters, coordinating private calls, and reflecting deeply on past misunderstandings, fully intending to extend an olive branch that prioritized healing over conflict. He reportedly hoped that demonstrating vulnerability and acknowledging mistakes would pave the way for meaningful dialogue for a family that had been fractured in very public ways. Instead, the king's decision effectively slammed the door on that effort, leaving Harry not only emotionally wounded but also grappling with a profound sense of powerlessness. One of the key aspects of Harry's emotional struggle, according to sources, was reconciling his own sense of responsibility with the seemingly unyielding stance of his father. The Duke reportedly questioned whether his attempts at reconciliation had been misinterpreted or undervalued, and whether the barriers between them were rooted in personal disappointment, institutional pressure, or a combination of both. These questions haunted him in private moments, as he weighed the consequences of continued attempts at connection against the potential risks of further rejection. In essence, Harry found himself trapped between the desire to repair familial bonds and the harsh reality of a refusal that carried deep symbolic and practical weight. The emotional intensity of this period was compounded by Harry's awareness of the public eye. Every interaction, every leak, and every rumor had the potential to magnify his personal heartbreak into a global narrative. Sources indicate that Harry was acutely conscious of how the media might frame the refusal. Some outlets would interpret it as a final judgment on his character, others as a continuation of palace drama, and still others as a reinforcement of existing stereotypes about estranged royals. Navigating these pressures required a delicate balance. Harry had to process his emotions, protect his family, and anticipate media reactions, all simultaneously. Harry's conversations with Meghan during this time reportedly reflected a mix of frustration, despair, and determination. Sources suggest that the Duke expressed feelings of betrayal, not only toward the king, but also toward the institution that seemed to prioritize protocol over reconciliation. Yet, despite this turmoil, he also sought to maintain composure for Meghan and their children, understanding that their stability and sense of security depended in large part on his ability to remain grounded. This internal conflict between personal pain and public responsibility underscores the unique pressures faced by someone living in the shadow of both family expectations and relentless media scrutiny. Financial concerns added another layer of complexity. Insiders reveal that Harry's inheritance and future financial security had long been intertwined with his position within the family structure. The king's refusal to meet, coupled with reports that inheritance decisions might be affected, introduced a tangible sense of vulnerability into Harry's world. It was no longer only an emotional challenge. It became a practical one, forcing Harry to consider the implications for his family's lifestyle, charitable endeavors, and long-term plans. This convergence of personal, familial, and financial stakes amplified the pressure, intensifying his sense of isolation and urgency. Harry's support network during this period was crucial. Friends and advisors close to him reportedly offered guidance, encouragement, and perspective, helping him navigate both his internal emotional landscape and the external pressures of public scrutiny. These confidants encouraged reflection, strategic planning, and emotional grounding, emphasizing the importance of maintaining dignity while still acknowledging hurt. Harry's engagement with this network illustrates the delicate balancing act he faced. He needed both emotional validation and pragmatic advice to chart a course through unprecedented personal and institutional challenges. Amidst the heartbreak, Harry reportedly reflected on the broader implications of the king's decision for his relationship with his father. He questioned what it said about forgiveness, about parental expectations, and about the boundaries of personal agency within a royal context. According to sources, he also contemplated how this refusal might impact the broader family dynamic, particularly the relationship between his children and the wider royal lineage. These reflections highlighted a deep awareness of intergenerational consequences, underscoring Harry's role as both son and father and intensifying the emotional weight of the situation. The Duke's inner turmoil was further compounded by a sense of being caught between tradition and modernity. Harry reportedly grappled with the tension between institutional loyalty, honoring the legacy and expectations of the monarchy, and the desire to assert his own path, independent of historical constraints. This tension manifested in private moments of anger and sadness, as well as in strategic planning sessions aimed at protecting his family's autonomy and public image. Sources indicate that Harry's approach was methodical, combining emotional processing with careful consideration of potential outcomes, a strategy designed to preserve both dignity and agency in an environment where both were constantly challenged. As days turned into weeks, Harry reportedly began to process his emotions with a blend of reflection and action. Sources describe him engaging in private writing, journaling, and conversations with mentors to better understand his feelings of rejection and betrayal. This period of introspection was not merely about coping. It was about preparing for the decisions and communications that would inevitably follow. Harry recognized that how he handled this moment could define his public persona, influence media narratives, and shape the trajectory of his family's future interactions with the monarchy. This chapter of Harry's story also illustrates the human complexity behind global headlines. While the public might reduce the situation to a simple narrative of estrangement or palace drama, insiders reveal the layers of emotion, strategy, and consequence that underpin each decision. Harry's experience was not merely a story of rejection. It was a story of navigating profound personal disappointment, public scrutiny, and the responsibilities of fatherhood and partnership under extraordinary circumstances. By examining Harry's perspective, we gain insight into the emotional cost of royal protocol, the fragility of familial bonds, and the resilience required to maintain both personal integrity and public composure. The king's refusal, while a single event, triggered a cascade of emotional, practical, and strategic challenges for Harry, each of which demanded careful navigation and reflection. His response, characterized by both vulnerability and deliberate planning, underscores the complex intersection of personal emotion, family loyalty, and public expectation that defines life in the modern monarchy. For Meghan Markle, the news that King Charles would not meet with Prince Harry to discuss reconciliation triggered a storm of emotions, ranging from shock to indignation. Insiders close to the Duchess of Sussex have described a sequence of private moments marked by disbelief, frustration, and an almost tangible sense of betrayal. Unlike Harry, whose pain leaned heavily toward introspection and personal hurt, Meghan's response combined protective instinct, public awareness, and strategic outrage, reflecting both her role as a partner and her experience navigating life under relentless media scrutiny. Immediately after hearing of the king's refusal, Meghan reportedly sought to speak with Harry, both to offer comfort and to gauge his emotional state. According to sources, the conversation was intense, emotional, and at times charged with anger. Meghan, who has long been portrayed as a fiercely loyal and protective partner, reportedly expressed disbelief that the king would decline a meeting designed to mend familial rifts. Her reaction was not merely personal. It was tied to her understanding of how the refusal could impact Harry, their children, and the broader narrative surrounding their family. In private conversations with aides and advisors, Meghan reportedly articulated a deep frustration with what she perceived as a continuation of outdated and rigid royal protocols. Sources suggest that she viewed the king's decision not as a minor procedural matter, but as an overt message that the monarchy would prioritize tradition and hierarchy over genuine reconciliation and familial healing. This perception fueled a mix of strategic calculation and emotional urgency. Meghan was determined to protect Harry's interests, advocate for their children's future, and simultaneously prepare for the inevitable media fallout. Meghan's private outrage reportedly translated quickly into meticulous public management. According to insiders, she and her communications team immediately began assessing how to frame the situation publicly, weighing options ranging from restraint to carefully crafted statements that could assert their perspective without escalating tensions unnecessarily. Meghan has always demonstrated an acute awareness of media dynamics, and this moment exemplified her skill in balancing emotional authenticity with strategic public communication. Her goal, insiders reveal, was to ensure that Harry and their children would not be unfairly portrayed as isolated or powerless in the face of the king's decision. Friends close to Meghan note that her outrage also carried an element of personal indignation. Sources describe her as feeling that Harry had been treated unfairly, both emotionally and institutionally, and that this pattern of exclusion and conditional support had persisted for years. Meghan reportedly questioned why the monarchy seemed willing to extend leniency or consideration to others, but withheld it from Harry, despite his efforts at reconciliation and his attempts to navigate past conflicts with humility. This perception of inequity appears to have intensified Meghan's protective stance, compelling her to act decisively on both emotional and practical fronts. In addition to private strategy sessions and intense personal conversations, Meghan is said to have leaned heavily on her close network of confidants. Advisors, friends, and family members reportedly provided emotional grounding, practical advice, and insight into potential public reactions. This support system allowed Meghan to process her anger and disappointment while simultaneously preparing for the various challenges that lay ahead, including media scrutiny, public speculation, and potential political ramifications within the broader royal sphere. A critical dimension of Meghan's response was her concern for the children. Sources indicate that Meghan immediately considered the implications of the king's refusal on their lives, both now and in the future. She reportedly discussed potential scenarios in which Harry's exclusion from reconciliation could affect the children's access to extended family, inheritance, and public perception. This foresight highlights Meghan's dual focus. While managing her own emotional response, she prioritized the welfare and security of her children, navigating the intersection of family loyalty and institutional politics with careful deliberation. Meghan's reaction was also shaped by her awareness of narrative control. Insiders suggest that she understood that the media would quickly interpret the king's refusal as a symbolic message about Harry's place in the royal family, and by extension, about her own role as his partner. Meghan reportedly debated with her team how best to manage coverage, striking a balance between asserting their perspective and avoiding further inflaming royal tensions. Sources describe her approach as methodical, reflecting a combination of emotional intelligence, media savvy, and strategic foresight. The Duchess's outrage also had tangible public manifestations. According to sources, Meghan engaged in a series of interviews, communications, and public appearances in which she subtly emphasized themes of fairness, family, and transparency, without directly criticizing the king. Observers note that these actions seemed designed to convey principled objection while protecting Harry from potential backlash, ensuring that the narrative centered on values of empathy and familial responsibility rather than personal vendetta. Private communications between Meghan and Harry reportedly reflected a shared determination to remain united in the face of institutional resistance. Sources suggest that Meghan often served as a source of emotional strength for Harry, encouraging him to maintain perspective, document interactions, and strategically assess next steps. Their partnership, according to those close to them, became a critical buffer against the destabilizing effects of the king's refusal, allowing both Harry and Meghan to navigate personal disappointment while maintaining focus on broader family and media considerations. Meghan's outrage was compounded by concerns over potential financial implications. Sources indicate that the refusal to meet with Harry could signal a willingness by the monarchy to reconsider inheritance arrangements, titles, or other forms of financial support. Meghan reportedly expressed deep frustration at the prospect that familial relationships could be intertwined so directly with financial leverage, viewing it as an additional form of control or punishment. This understanding intensified her sense of urgency, reinforcing her commitment to both advocacy and protection for Harry and their children. Another layer of complexity arose from Meghan's understanding of the public perception of royal protocol. Insiders suggest that she recognized the symbolic weight of the king's refusal. It was more than a personal decision. It was a statement about power, hierarchy, and the consequences of dissent within the royal family. Meghan's reaction, therefore, was informed not only by personal loyalty and protective instinct, but also by a sophisticated grasp of institutional symbolism and public optics. She reportedly articulated that the refusal sent a broader message about who has access, voice, and influence within the monarchy, reinforcing her sense that measured but assertive response was necessary. Meghan's approach to managing her outrage also involved careful documentation. Sources indicate that she maintained records of communications, public statements, and media coverage, ensuring that she and Harry had an accurate timeline and context for potential future discussions, legal considerations, or public commentary. This practice reflects her strategic mindset, combining emotional processing with meticulous attention to procedural detail. By doing so, Meghan reportedly aimed to protect Harry, herself, and their children from misrepresentation or misinterpretation in both public and private arenas. Throughout this period, Meghan's emotional intensity remained high. Friends describe her as oscillating between frustration, protective determination, and a calculated calm designed to preserve strategic advantage. This balance between emotion and strategy, insiders note, is a hallmark of Meghan's approach to crisis. She feels deeply and reacts authentically, but she also channels those feelings into deliberate action intended to protect family, legacy, and reputation. By examining Meghan's perspective, it becomes clear that her outrage was not simply a reaction to familial rejection. It was an orchestrated blend of emotional expression, strategic planning, and protective foresight. Her responses highlight the interplay of personal loyalty, public awareness, and institutional navigation that defines life within and adjacent to the royal family. Meghan's approach reflects an understanding that the king's refusal was more than a moment of conflict. It was a pivotal event with implications for family, public perception, and long-term legacy. As tensions continued to mount, sources revealed that Harry's legal and advisory teams began exploring potential avenues for recourse, including private mediation and the possibility of controlled public commentary. The goal was to mitigate damage, clarify misunderstandings, and preserve the couple's public image without further inflaming the king's position. These discussions, however, were fraught with complexity, as any perceived breach of protocol or public criticism could have far-reaching consequences for both the couple and the institution as a whole. The strategic planning involved meticulous attention to detail, scenario analysis, and consideration of every potential response from both the media and royal officials. The refusal also had emotional ramifications that extended beyond the immediate family. Friends, associates, and philanthropic partners of Harry and Meghan reportedly expressed concern over the increasing stress and isolation the couple faced. Private conversations indicated that the refusal was interpreted not just as a personal slight, but as a broader signal about the couple's place within the royal framework. The psychological toll of being publicly rebuffed by the king, coupled with the relentless scrutiny of the press and social media, contributed to an atmosphere of heightened tension, anxiety, and uncertainty. Observers described the couple as caught in a liminal space, neither fully integrated within the formal structures of the monarchy nor entirely detached from its influence and expectations. Within the palace, efforts to manage internal perception were equally intense. Senior aides and courtiers sought to reassure other family members and staff that the decision, while unprecedented, was made with careful consideration of both personal and institutional factors. Regular briefings emphasized the importance of maintaining discretion, preventing leaks, and projecting unity. Advisors analyzed historical precedents, noting instances where personal conflicts within the monarchy had become public and assessing the potential outcomes of various responses. The overarching goal was to protect the integrity of the institution while navigating a highly charged personal and public crisis. During this period, Harry and Meghan also began reassessing their public engagements, philanthropic initiatives, and media strategies. Every appearance, statement, and interaction was scrutinized for its potential to influence public opinion, impact the monarchy, and shape the narrative surrounding their position within the royal family. Sources close to the couple reported that they were increasingly focused on messaging that emphasized their independence, commitment to charitable work, and personal integrity, seeking to counterbalance the narrative of familial discord. The challenge lay in striking a delicate balance between asserting agency and avoiding actions that could be construed as provocative or disrespectful to the king. At the same time, speculation regarding the long-term implications of the king's refusal intensified. Analysts and royal commentators debated whether this move signaled a permanent rift or a temporary pause in familial communication, weighing historical patterns of conflict within the monarchy against the unprecedented nature of the current situation. Some argued that the refusal could have lasting consequences for the succession, public perception, and the broader reputation of the royal family. Others suggested that careful diplomacy, mediated communication, and strategic engagement could eventually restore a degree of reconciliation, albeit with new boundaries and conditions established by the king. As the days turned into weeks, the interplay between personal emotion, institutional responsibility, and public perception continued to evolve. Harry and Meghan's strategies for managing media, philanthropy, and personal messaging became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating real-time analysis of social media trends, press coverage, and public sentiment. The palace's internal communications and strategic planning teams worked tirelessly to anticipate potential developments, prepare responses, and maintain a coherent narrative. Every statement, meeting, and public engagement was scrutinized for its potential impact, reflecting the high-stakes environment in which the couple and the monarchy operated. In this context, the king's refusal functioned as both a catalyst and a test. It revealed underlying tensions, highlighted the complex dynamics between personal relationships and institutional obligations, and challenged all parties to navigate a rapidly shifting landscape of media attention, public scrutiny, and emotional stakes. For Harry and Meghan, it underscored the fragility of personal connections within the royal framework and the intense pressures of balancing familial loyalty with public responsibility. For the palace, it emphasized the need for meticulous strategy, careful messaging, and unwavering attention to both internal and external perceptions. This section fully explores the impact of King Charles's refusal on Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, the palace staff, and public perception, detailing the emotional, strategic, and media-related consequences of the event. The announcement that King Charles had refused Prince Harry's request for a reconciliation meeting sent shockwaves not just through the royal family, but across the world. For many, the news seemed almost unfathomable. A son being denied a private conversation with his father, a sovereign ruling not only over a kingdom, but over the personal connections that bind a family together. In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, the air was reportedly thick with tension as aides, courtiers, and senior advisors struggled to come to terms with the weight of the decision. It was more than a family disagreement. It was a declaration of authority, a line drawn in the sand, and a signal to both the public and the family that certain boundaries would not be crossed. According to sources close to the palace, King Charles's choice was deliberate, calculated, and communicated with a sense of solemn finality. The decision was framed as a protective measure for the integrity of the monarchy and the stability of the institution. However, it carried unmistakable personal undertones. In private, Charles reportedly felt that past actions by Harry and Meghan had undermined the dignity of the crown, and that attempts at reconciliation needed to occur on terms that he controlled. To those observing from the outside, it appeared as a cold and decisive action, leaving Harry in a position of isolation and Meghan in a whirlwind of disbelief and frustration. Meghan Markle's reaction, according to insiders, was one of immediate shock. She reportedly spent the first hours in stunned silence, absorbing the implications of the refusal. In her mind, this was not merely about a missed opportunity for a father-son conversation. It represented a larger pattern of control and exclusion. Sources close to Meghan described a mix of anger and concern. Anger, because the decision seemed punitive and inflexible. Concern, because it signaled that any attempt to mediate, to bridge divides, or to foster dialogue would now be constrained by the king's unwavering stance. For Meghan, the situation intensified the sense of being caught in the crossfire between personal loyalty and public scrutiny, a position she had navigated countless times in the past. The immediate fallout extended beyond personal feelings. Advisors on both sides began to strategize about the next steps, weighing risks, potential outcomes, and the optics of each possible action. Harry, already accustomed to living under intense media attention, was confronted with a new challenge: how to manage his personal disappointment while also considering the implications for his public image. Meghan, similarly, had to navigate the dual pressures of protecting her family and managing a narrative that was now spiraling out of their control. Every communication, private or public, required careful consideration, as even minor missteps could escalate into headlines that would dominate news cycles for days. Within the palace, reactions among senior courtiers and staff varied. Some were reportedly sympathetic to Harry, understanding the human desire for reconciliation and the pain of rejection. Others emphasized the necessity of protocol, tradition, and the preservation of the monarchy's image, framing the king's decision as a firm but necessary assertion of authority. Internal memos circulated emphasizing discretion, urging staff to avoid leaks or unofficial commentary that could exacerbate the situation. Meetings were convened to assess potential fallout, ranging from media speculation to public perception, and to devise strategies that would prevent the story from overshadowing other royal initiatives and engagements. The press immediately picked up on the story, fueling a firestorm of speculation. Headlines varied from sympathetic portrayals of Harry as a son denied his father's ear, to narratives framing the king's action as a necessary reinforcement of monarchical discipline. Social media amplified every detail, with viral threads, hashtags, and opinion polls driving conversations worldwide. Analysts noted that the refusal, while ostensibly a private family matter, had become a public spectacle with far-reaching consequences. The situation exemplified the unique challenges faced by modern royalty, the intersection of personal relationships, institutional responsibility, and relentless global media scrutiny. Harry's inner circle reportedly urged a measured response. The focus, they argued, should be on strategic patience, emphasizing personal dignity and philanthropic commitments rather than reactive public statements. Meghan, however, was said to have struggled with this approach. Her instinct, according to sources, was to protect her family from both emotional harm and reputational damage. She reportedly advised Harry on messaging, suggested careful engagement with allies and media circles, and encouraged private discussions with trusted confidants to chart a path forward. Their joint efforts underscored the tension between maintaining a calm, controlled public persona and managing deeply personal emotional stakes. The king's decision also had significant financial and legal implications. Reports emerged suggesting that Prince Harry's inheritance could be affected, with advisors confirming that the refusal was intertwined with broader considerations about entitlement, legacy, and future financial arrangements. Legal experts began analyzing potential scenarios, evaluating how the royal prerogatives could intersect with personal property, trusts, and the conditions under which inheritance could be altered. This added a layer of complexity to an already fraught situation, intertwining personal reconciliation with matters of financial security and long-term planning. As the days progressed, palace insiders indicated that informal channels of communication between Harry and the king had all but closed. While traditional correspondence and mediated discussions remained possible, the lack of a direct meeting introduced a heightened sense of estrangement. For Harry, this created a dual burden, navigating his role within the royal framework while simultaneously grappling with personal disappointment and the pressure to maintain a composed public presence. Meghan, meanwhile, focused on managing the home front, family well-being, and the strategic messaging that could mitigate negative public interpretations. Observers noted that this moment represented a critical juncture in the ongoing evolution of the royal family. Historical precedents offered limited guidance, as few prior conflicts had unfolded under such intense global scrutiny, in an era of instant media dissemination and social media virality. Analysts suggested that the king's refusal could either harden divides or, paradoxically, create conditions for a more controlled, eventual reconciliation. The delicate interplay of emotion, strategy, and public perception would shape not only the immediate fallout, but also the long-term legacy of this family chapter. As the world watched, the narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan became increasingly complex. Public opinion oscillated between sympathy, criticism, and intense curiosity. The couple's every movement, statement, and appearance was scrutinized, interpreted, and reinterpreted in real time. In this climate, King Charles's refusal stood as a defining moment,